Hi, this is your host Apni Bhartia and welcome to State of Energy. We are here at John Hopkins University in Washington DC, and today we have with us Ana Jimenez, Project Manager at TODO Group at the Linux Foundation. Anna, it's great to have you on the show.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Tell us a bit about this TODO Group.
Yeah, so TODO Group, it's a Linux Foundation project and it's an open community of OSPO practitioners. So for those unfamiliar with the term OSPO, comes from Open Source Program Offices. So basically our organizations willing to manage open source operations, and they have it under a centralized place called the OSPO itself.
When it comes to OSPO, there are so many things to talk about, whether a company needs OSPO or not, what does OSPO do. So let's start with when we look at OSPOs, what are their role in a company?
So actually, before going any further on these questions, I have to be honest that in the community, we always say your OSPO is not my OSPO. Because depending on the sector, on the organization's goals, the OSPO and the role that it takes, it's going to vary. So for instance, it's not the same talking with a software organization where maybe open source is already integrated and maybe the value of the OSPO it's different from a traditional company or a company that is not selling software as the as the main business, but maybe they are using software. And they need to have some kind of digital transformation and deal with open source consumption or open source contribution. So the OSPO role is going to be more onto cultural shift, for instance, and implemented processes, policies that doesn't exist and tries to adapt it to the organizational culture. Maybe from the software company, that's going to be more into having multiple project manager roles inside of the OSPO. So yeah, it's so wide world, and that's why actually we have this community, right? So to serve these best practices.
I talk to a lot of OSPOs all the time, and their rules also change depending on the company. There is no set of OSPO means they do what. When you work with the TODO Group, is it like companies they don't know they need to hit OSPOs and they hire somebody seasoned, who knows about open source, or you feel that we still have to educate companies that no, you are dipping your toes in open source, whether you're just simply consuming or producing content. You need what are the criteria that a company should have OSPO?
In TODO, I think it was like a year ago. So the community put together some kind of stages, and of course it can vary, but it's a great guideline on an inflection point where organizations maybe should be thinking about building an OSPO. So I think if the organization is using a lot of open source in their products or in their services, they should have a centralized place to manage those operations. And now more than ever, because we are not just talking about to put order into chaos, but also to deal with all the regulations coming in. For instance, I'm from Europe, where all these new EU regulations, the CRA, the AI Act, it's talking about open source and how organizations should be managing this. So all the compliance side is where OSPO also plays a big role. And it's like if you are just taking care ad hoc when problems happen, that is going to come with potential risk, vulnerabilities, and having a place, having a team able to operate in this open source ecosystem might mitigate this risk.
And is OSPO more about dealing with the inner working of a company and how to kind of build a bridge with or how to facilitate developers within, because as you also mentioned, sometimes you're writing a software, you have to ensure that the license is compatible. You're not releasing your own IP, you are doing it in right way, because if you do it publicly, your company's brand may get tarnished, or OSPO's work is more to deal with external communities, that, hey, those are community we engage. So does OSPO engage internally or externally or both?
Yeah, I will say both, but depending on which OSPO you ask and the organization it is, maybe they are starting small. There are OSPOs that they start with inner source, or they don't even include inner source in their program because, as I mentioned, it does. It's not the same talking with an automotive industry than with a software company or a public sector administration that is having an OSPO. So the goals are going to vary, and there are ones that are more involved in dealing with the open source ecosystems, and there are other ones that maybe they are not ready yet, but they are working to have that kind of connection. But the ideal OSPO should be this linchpin in between the organizations and the open source ecosystem, and being able to communicate in between both worlds.
What kind of resources does your TODO Group provide to these OSPOs? Because as you said, different OSPOs, your OSPO is not same as my OSPO, depending on the company you're involved in. So it's not very easy. So how do you help these OSPOs?
So the TODO mission is to create best practices and as community and tools to help open source from office adoption and help organizations to manage open source operations. So we have, for instance, a popular resource are the TODO guides. It's a set, I think there are 12 different guides on different angles and questions that many OSPOs have been facing in the past, like how to deal with policies, processes, open source compliance, releasing projects as open source, encouraging employees' contributions to open source projects. So there are a wide variety of guides. We do also, in collaboration with LF Research, we also launched the State of the OSPOs. So it's a survey to get the pulse on the OSPOs. We ask questions where, like, for instance, where is your OSPO landing, or where is your OSPO reporting? What challenges are you facing? What are your main objectives? So we kind of get a trend on, okay, are we seeing some kind of different personas around OSPOs and so on? We do also have, so there is a guy, we have a mind map that maps like the common responsibilities and maybe like different, the responsibilities that an OSPO might take. They doesn't necessarily to have all of them. And I think I'm forgetting a bunch of them, but if you go to todogroup.org resources, you will find all the resources that the community has been putting together in the last 10 years, because we have been here 10 years. It's crazy.
To better understand where the market is, do you folks do any surveys, reports on a regular basis? If yes, what are those, and what has been the recent finding and the trend that you're seeing?
Yeah, so for instance, the state of the OSPO is a yearly survey we do with LF Research, and we try to get the survey worldwide. So we get the status of the OSPO in Europe, in Americas, in Asia mainly. And so, for instance, last year, we are now in the process of making the 2024. So we don't have any data yet, but for the last year, we saw like OSPOs were growing really fast. But one of the major challenges was to communicate better with the C-level and funding issues. Because, many OSPOs are considered like cost-centric, and that is this kind of conversation and how to better communicate with C-level is one of the major discussions we're having in TODO through the touchpoints calls that are virtual calls happening every month, where OSPO professionals can jump in a safe space, Chatham House rules, and they can talk about these issues.
Beyond, the OSPO scene as a cost center, any other challenges or hardship that when you talk to some of the OSPOs where you see a pattern?
Yeah, it's basically communicating effectively with C-level. That is something that I have been keep hearing in so many conversations. It is also shared in the surveys from last years as well. So that and metrics. So and I think it's kind of related, right? Because sometimes when you're talking with an engineering team and with a business team, they don't know how to communicate because they are talking different languages. So, but data is a universal language, and how to make this communication and reporting with effective metrics that serves the value of the OSPO and what the OSPO is bringing to the organization.
When you say communication problem, communication with C-level, beyond cost, what are the other struggles that they face?
Some OSPOs, I cannot say that this is a trend because we don't know, but some OSPOs struggle to share the value of open source through the OSPO because it's a different world, it's a different way of operating. It's just like it's a culture of sharing, and many organizations they don't in the first place they don't understand what a culture of sharing means, and the reason of why contributing back and what contributing upstream it's a must do. That is something also that many organizations and many OSPOs struggles when trying to prove their value, and many maybe. And as I said, I cannot say this is a trend, but maybe one of the reasons why many OSPOs are being laid off is because organizations expect like short-term revenue or short-term actions. And okay, what have you done in 1 year? And that is not the point of the OSPO. This is more a continuous circle, long-term investment, and something that is about support. Not about revenue. It's about being the support team of something that is present and is critical right now in all organizations that thinks about managing software or deals with software at any point.
What are the risks companies will or might run into if they don't have open source program offices?
So there has been a lot of conversations around securing the supply chain. So even though you are operating on a high level, right, to take a step back and look at what has been below that, where is the community that is contributing to the critical infrastructure where all your services and products rely on. If you don't take care of that, there might be major vulnerabilities and issues that you are missing out. And the organization, if they are already involved in using any software that has open source components, they should know what's going on and take actions to avoid this risk and this vulnerability. So it's investing on risk management. It's investing on mitigate those potential vulnerabilities rather than of course also it's about innovation, but I feel I will bet more to the messaging of it's for building more secure software.
Can you talk about some of the positive trends that you're seeing in terms of OSPOs, or you feel that market is going in a different direction than we want?
So I see, comparing with past years, I see that there are more organizations that maybe they don't know how to create the OSPO, but they are thinking of. So that's good. I mean, that's a big step. Like having organizations willing to have a centralized place to manage open source operations instead of doing it ad hoc. I think that's a big success.
Why companies should have OSPO?
I would say the first thing is to bring open source talent, subject matter experts of open source into the organization. Because open source, even though it's not new for organizations, or if you look it from an organizational perspective, it might sound quite new for them. So they need talent that helps them to navigate, that guides them, that sets the guardrails for that organization, and to consume and to contribute to open source in a healthy way, in a secure way. And that's only being done if you invest on open source. And part of that can be through an OSPO, that is that vehicle to help manage all these operations.
And companies who do want, as you said, that everybody, like companies, they realize when they're setting up their open source program offices, what are the right steps to approach this?
Again, based on the TODO Group learnings, I'm here just speaking on for my for the community. I will say do a check on how much open source are you using, is your organization using in those projects. I've seen journeys from organizations that 10 years ago they had only 10% of open source dependencies in the projects, and now they realize they have 90%. Wow. So that is, if you have 90% of your dependencies running that are open source, that is something to invest on. Like, how many risk or potential risk might have there. So do a quick check, and then also check how is the culture of your organization going, and where do they need support. And from that, it will help you first say, where does the OSPO should be landing? Where should it be reporting? And based on your organization's goal, and how to get started. And what are the first tasks that OSPO should be taking, depending on the goals and the challenges the organization is facing. And of course, once those challenges are overcome and there are some clear processes and policies around, that might shift or add new task layers, and the OSPO might grow organically. But it's first small, do a small check and focus on these critical areas and where does the organization need support and needs to manage open source urgently, and there is where the OSPO or subject matter experts in open source can help.
What kind of activities are there which are part of this TODO group, where in addition to the resources that you talked about that you provide to them, where you also bring OSPOs together so they can also brainstorm? Do you do any such things?
Yeah, so we have the major events are happening in all the open source summits in Europe, in North America, and Japan. And these are the OSPO contracts. We do also have like mini summits, most of them in Europe, that are called OSPOlogy Live. So OSPOlogy Live are done in collaboration with other LF projects and outside LF as well. So for instance, LF Energy is helping, OpenSSF is helping, LF Europe is helping, Inner Source Commons Foundation, it's also helping. And we try to bring OSPO professionals to talk about challenges and the major questions that they are facing for specific regions in Europe, because so OSPOs are different. So not only about sectors, but also OSPOs being established in different regions. Regions might vary, so we understand that having these OSPOlogy lives, small gatherings, less than 60 people there, for specific regions are really important. We have one coming in Malmo, hosted by OSPO at IKEA in May, and we have been, the last one was also in the Netherlands, hosted by the Dutch Tax Administration OSPO. So we keep varying the topics, the themes, even the sectors. The last one was on public administration, this one is more on retail OSPOs. And yeah, that's also, we also have like these local chapters. We have a OSPO local meetup in Japan, where the Japanese community meets every 2 weeks. And we have an OSPO local meetup in China as well. So, and also one starting right now in Latin America as well, countries.
And we are here at this event. Talk about your presence here.
I will be moderating a panel on OSPOs. So OSPOs, these are gonna be more traditional OSPOs and public sector OSPOs mainly. And we will be, the panelists will be discussing on the challenges they're facing as OSPO being established in a regulated environment. That might be vary from, I don't know, company OSPOs or software OSPOs. So these specific challenges they're facing, this cultural transition they need to face, and hopefully share some best practices for those who want to build an OSPO, but they are not sure on how to build an OSPO can get started.
What kind of folks are ideal candidate to become open source program officers themselves? Do you have to be specialized in open source, or you have to be specialized in software who understand open source, or you have to be just a techie? Just what are the criterias?
The OSPO setup and the roles within are quite different among organizations. But one thing that is that happens in all the organizations is that the open source needs to be infused in all departments, in all teams. And because of that, having a matrix of experts either working in the OSPO or working closely to the OSPO. So for instance, if the OSPO is working with the security team, having a person or people that knows how to manage open source and security, and having these two is important. And the business side also the same, someone that speaks the language of business and also has some experience on dealing with open source. So I will say, and to be honest, this is like maybe in some years, I will see like having open source as another skill that people across organization must have. It doesn't matter if you're coming from engineering, if you're coming from marketing, if you're coming from security, for compliance. That should be a skill to have. That is the role of the OSPO to also teach that has that kind of advocacy. So coming back to your question, is more about having some kind of how to operate in open source and know how open source work, adapted to the department you're working in. So what do you need to know about open source if you're working in a security team? What do you need to know about open source if you're working in the business team? That's my opinion on this.
You host these TODO groups or OSPOs, as part of, a lot of activities that you talked about. Where do you see that OSPOs either are responsible or they feel that without bringing that cultural change, open source alone will not, because code base, open source is less about code base, it's more about collaboration, it's more about people. So what is the importance of cultural change for OSPOs?
Eventually, I think most of the OSPOs are willing to find ways where the organization can assist open source and help the sustainability of open source projects and have some kind of commitment with open source. So for that, they need people in the organization to know how to contribute to open source, in what way, why it's important. And that is why this cultural change comes in, because there are many organizations which people, they might want to contribute to open source, but they don't know how. They also need to meet some, it's not just, okay, contribute to this project. So if they are contributing, representing an organization, they need to know some processes and policies happening in the organization. So all this education is where OSPOs comes in.
Anna, thank you so much for taking time out today and
Thank you
talk
for the
about this TODO
opportunity.
Group. And, of course, great insights there. And I would love to chat with you again. Thank you.
Thank you.